Stop leaving money on the table. Manufacturers are leaving money on the table every day. Don't just assume that there aren't grants out there. There very likely are. My advice is get knowledgeable about grants and then decide if it's the right thing for you and your company.
The Industrial Growth Institute podcast connects you with the big thinkers, makers, and subject matter experts across all aspects of an integrated B2B industrial revenue growth function. From strategy, board oversight and transactions, through all the phases of manufacturing marketing, the complexities of industrial sales, and the nuances of marketing and sales technology and customer experience, I speak with guests who bring insights, innovative perspectives, best practices, and twists on traditional approaches. Each episode explores high-level thinking and in-the-weeds actionable tactics. If you enjoyed these discussions, then please help me out by liking and sharing the podcast, and especially by leaving a comment and giving a review. So with no further ado, let's jump into this episode. And we're back for another episode of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. I'm Ed Marsh, your host, and we're taking a slightly different tack today. Normally, guests have angles on how you can make more money through marketing, sales, strategy, et cetera. Today's guest is Micki Vandeloo, president of Lakeview Consulting, and her angle is actually helping you find grant money that you, in turn, can use to finance some of the work that maybe some of the other guests on this show describe and talk about. Lakeview Consulting is a team of 5 experienced grant professionals who have collectively obtained over $160 million in grant funding for clients in the manufacturing and trade association communities. They do a broad range of activities. They provide research, writing, and consulting services to help clients obtain grants and to underwrite growth. And Micki personally has 15 years of experience performing grant consulting services for clients in the manufacturing community, including for-profit companies, manufacturers, trade associations. But here's why I think she's really going to move the needle with this audience in this conversation. She's a manufacturing engineer. Her engineering and business degrees, as well as over 25 years of experience in manufacturing, really lend a degree of credibility to her very sound technical foundation in terms of grant writing. A decade ago, she published a book, The For-Profit Grant Writing Guide. She's been honored by the Grant Professionals Association. She speaks and writes often on the subject of manufacturing grants. And she's a decent person. She volunteers at local nonprofits and at her church. So Micki, welcome. I mean, sometimes it seems like it's really hard work to earn every additional dollar of revenue. So this is a really seductive topic, and I'm sure we'd all like to figure out how to get some grants. So thank you for joining me today.
Sure. No problem. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, good. So for everyone listening, I mean, there's definitely some folks in your company who should know about this. So you need to share it across your company. This alone is, worth the price of subscription for this podcast. Of course, it's free, but there's going to be a lot of value, I think, that you can translate to your bottom line. So just hit the button and subscribe. And Micki, let's start with your bonafides. Industrial engineering degree, 23 years as an engineer and an industrial salesperson. You've been in industries like automotive and sheet and coil steel. You're not a Vassar journalism major who saw a factory tour on TV one time and says they specialize in manufacturing.
Nope.
Tell us about your background.
Sure. So, I decided when I went to college, I actually had a choice between going to college for a music degree or going for an engineering degree, which kind of plays into the fact that I have this very unique mix of technical and creative sides.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I chose money, I chose to get the engineering degree, and I went to the University of Illinois, a renowned engineering school, and had every intention of just living out my life in manufacturing because I really love the industrial processes, understanding them better, being able to solve problems, being able to do all the things that engineers do in their day-to-day work. And I really enjoyed doing that for 25 years. I worked in engineering for an automotive tier 1 supplier when I started out. I actually worked for a year for Boeing, which was McDonnell Douglas at the time, which ages me dramatically. And so basically,
that was when the engineers were running the company.
That was when the engineers were running the company. Not so sure that's the case anymore. But so I worked at McDonnell Douglas. I worked for a tier 1 automotive supplier, loved automotive. Doesn't foster a strong work-life balance a lot of times. At least I didn't find that it did. So I switched to working for a manufacturing extension partnership center. And that's where I got my first introduction to grants, because we would I would help my clients apply for training grants to offset the cost of our services. And I kind of liked it. I thought that it was nice that, companies could get that money back. And then I got hired by one of my clients, and that was a steel service center. And in the process, it was 2008, 2009, when it just wasn't easy to be in manufacturing at all.
Right.
I don't know that it's ever terribly easy, but it really wasn't hard at that point in time. And so the state of Illinois, and this is kind of the pre-COVID tranche of funding that came out. So in 2008, the federal government had the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, ARA, very much distributed like COVID funds. So the IRA, the BIL, all those programs that are now, continually providing funding to support manufacturing. The precursor to those was the ARA Act. And as happened with the ARPA funds through COVID, that money went to states, and each state had the choice to spend that money however they sought to do so. Well, the state of Illinois chose to incentivize wind energy production. And because we were doing coil and sheet steel, because we were processing just the right gauges of that type of steel, we found that we could be a part of that supply chain. So we applied for, I think it was $660,000 of funding. And that was going to fund some new equipment, hiring some people, training, that type of thing. We got the grant, and we had a 2-year period of performance for the grant. So we had 2 years to buy the equipment and all that type of thing. Well, as was happening quite a bit during the 2008, 2009 timeframe, a lot of companies went under. And as those companies would go under, if they had received those funds, the funder would call me and say, we have another $500,000 of funding. Is there any way you can use it? And that's a great conversation to have with the president of your company, who was right down the hall from me. So I'd walk down the hall and I'd be like, okay, they've got $500,000. What do you want to spend it on? We had this kind of laundry list built, and we ended up getting $2.3 million of funding. And that's when I really became a believer in the transformative power of grants for a company. Through that grant, we were able to hire 13 people. We did a total of about $3.3 million of investment, of which we got $2.3 million paid for. We were the poster child for that grant. We spent the money as we were supposed to spend it. We did everything the right way. That's why we kept getting the money. But the more important thing that I came to realize is if I wasn't doing this for my employers or for my customers or for my clients, then nobody was doing it. Nobody was coming to us and saying, hey, can we help you find grants to support your success? And so I started Lakeview Consulting. And that was back in 2009-ish, 2010. And I wrote a lot of grants. I did it as a side hustle. I worked as an engineer by day, and I worked as a grant writer by night. And it got to be a pretty busy life. I went to work for an automation company that one of my former colleagues had built. And I did that until 2017, and then decided in 2017 that I was going to go full time. So that's what I did. And now I have 4 employees. I have a researcher, 2 writers, and a business development person. We are rocking and rolling. I mean, we're helping companies every day, and I love doing it.
That's great. We're going to talk more about your business model as we go along. But back to your time at the MEP. Obviously, that was formative for you in increasing your awareness of the kinds of grant programs that are available. That's an interesting program. I think it's under NIST, under Department of Commerce. A lot of companies don't realize it's there, don't take advantage of it. Who's the ideal client for the MEP?
For the MEP, they work with small and medium-sized manufacturers. They have statewide presence generally. We've helped 12, I believe, of the MEP centers get continued funding to continue their services.
So you actually consult with them as well?
We actually consult with them, yes. We actually work with them. We work with trade association foundations, and we work with manufacturers. And MEP centers are a great resource for any small and medium-sized manufacturer. They have technical assistance services. They have a lot of different lean manufacturing. They do a lot of quality type services. They have a supplier scouting program that's phenomenal. The nice thing about the MEP system is that it is a what I would call a quasi-government association. They are partially government funded, but they're also partially funded by their client fees. But they can charge a reduced rate for those fees because they are supported by the government. So while they don't offer free services, they do offer a lot of webinars, a lot of great resources. And so small, medium-sized manufacturers of any kind really can work with MEPs and should.
And how do you define small and medium?
The way they worded it was 500 or less employees generally.
Okay. All right.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I have never heard of the grant professional certification exam. Tell me about that.
Sure. So the grant professional certification is a certification that is obtained by grant professionals who wish to elevate their level of recognition of the basics of grant writing. So basically, it's a rigorous exam. You have to have so many years of practical experience. You have to the application itself is pretty detailed, even to get accepted for the exam. So basically, you have to have provided so much in pro bono services. You have to have so much community involvement. You have to be a real well-rounded person, basically to even apply. And then you go through a test that takes about a day, and it just tests you on all the important things about grant funding. So. Yeah. So a grant professional's job is much more than people realize. Mm-hmm.
Right. Is that certification something that's available for in-house people, or is it only for external consultants like yourself?
No, it's for in-house people as well. There's a number of in-house grant writers that work like for medical centers, nonprofits, large nonprofits. So anybody can get that. Yeah.
And if somebody's looking for someone to help them with grants, obviously, you should be the first call as I get done listening to this, but is that a credential that they should have as a requirement when they look for somebody?
It should be. I can say that in my particular niche, it isn't as important. I think that what manufacturers are looking for is somebody to guide them on the process.
Right.
And I've obtained that certification. I think it's important. I know it's important in the nonprofit sector. A lot of nonprofits use them to hire both internal and external consultants. But yeah, it is important.
So you mentioned manufacturing. Let's kind of start with manufacturing at a high level.
Sure.
What do you think most manufacturers misunderstand about grants?
Well, I think that most of them just don't know about grants. I don't know that they're misunderstood. Most manufacturers, when I talk to them, if they have any experience with grants, it's typically a training grant. And it's typically something that they filled out a form for a community college and they got a grant to support their training, which is a great way to be introduced to grants. Nothing wrong with it. What I think people misunderstand about grants is, one, the importance of following the directions. I think if I'm looking at it as a manufacturing leader who's busy and who really doesn't have time to do word counts and pay attention to fonts and all that kind of stuff, they don't think of it as being that important. But what I tell clients is, while it may not seem important, it is a reason for them to throw out your application. So,
literally the font of your application could result in your disqualification?
Could result, yes.
Wow.
Or if you have too many pages, if they tell you you have to explain yourself in 2 pages and you take 5 pages,
right,
they can throw it out. So that is one big misunderstanding that I see, is just that clients really don't understand the importance of what seems to be very trivial things. The other thing I don't know that clients truly understand, or that they misunderstand a lot of times, is and I just wrote an article on this. I have a number of articles on my website, and I just wrote an article on this. A lot of times we will not send clients initially to like a federal grant that's millions of dollars. I truly believe that, especially for somebody that's new to grants, which 95% of our clients are, a better fit is going to be a state grant that might be $25,000 or $30,000. You can actually stack grants. So if you get a grant for training and then you're also doing equipment and they'll fund the equipment, you can apply for that equipment funding. So you can stack grants one on top of another. But I think it's important for clients to really get the experience with a smaller grant and understand what's required for a grant and what kind of documentation is required. It gets them into the process in kind of a low risk and low effort way. And so working them into the grant process, I think, is really, really important.
And when you say get accustomed to it, does that mean just the application process or actually running
Yes.
the entire grant period out?
Well, both really, but getting them accustomed to the application process, because there's a lot of information that's typically required for any grant. It's
Right.
not just, just the small grants or just the big grants. There's a lot of information that's required.
And I want to make sure that I'm using the term correctly. My understanding is that by definition, a grant does not need to be repaid. It's like a gift, but with strings attached. Is that correct?
It is like a gift. It is revenue, and that's what I tell clients. The other thing to understand about grants is that it is revenue and you will have to pay taxes on it. Yes, taxable revenue. So
Got it.
It is taxable. So what I tell clients is that a grant doesn't have to be repaid unless you don't follow what the funder wants to see once you get the grant. So, for example, I've had clients that have applied for grants and then discovered that they couldn't hire as many people as what they had said they were going to hire in the grant application. You can always go back to the funder. You can always go back to them and say, we didn't hire as many people. Can we adjust our budgets? That type of thing. If you don't do that and they just find out through your reporting, you stand a really strong chance of getting part of your money taken away. So it's called a clawback provision. So basically in every grant application, there's a clawback provision that says if this person doesn't do what they say they're going to do and doesn't make an attempt to make it right, we can take a percentage of the grant back proportional to the amount that they didn't do. So if they only hired 3 people instead of 5, they would take 40% of the grant away.
Are grant funds normally distributed in tranches, or is it provided entirely up front typically?
Actually, it's not provided up front usually at all. You have to apply for the grant, be approved for the grant, and then typically there's either a portion that's given up front. It depends on the length of the grant. So if it's a short-term grant, like a training grant, and the training is going to last 3 months, typically you have to apply for the grant, get the grant, do the training, and then the grant is given to you after you provide proof of the training. So it can be that 3 months, 4 months before you get the money. It's all reimbursement. Most grants work that way. However, with larger grants, with federal grants, ones that take a little bit longer, there can be like milestone-based payments that can be worked out with the funder.
And so you've mentioned a couple different sources of grants thus far. There's federal government, state government, industry, presumably nonprofits, and some foundations. Are there others that I'm missing?
There aren't very many foundation grants for manufacturers. There are federal and state are the primary ones. There also are some local incentives, especially in larger communities. They will have like tax incentives or enterprise zones or special incentives to try to encourage growth. At the state level, there's a couple of different sources of funding that can fund manufacturers. One is tax credits. So some states choose to incentivize growth in manufacturing through tax credits. So you can get tax credits for equipment purchases. You can get tax credits for new hiring, those types of things. In many states, though, there are a number of grants that they use to help promote manufacturing. So it really depends on the state, the leadership in the state, their attitude toward new industrial development. There is a wave of economic development called the Technology-Based Economic Development, TBED, and that is supporting technology growth through economic development. And a lot of those types of communities do have grant funds that will fund like Industry 4.0 application, purchase of new and innovative equipment. So it just depends on, again, the approach. The state of Missouri, for example, offers almost entirely tax credits. They have some grants, but very few. They have a tiered tax credit program that can be very lucrative to clients. And what I tell clients is a tax credit it basically avoids you having to pay the amount of taxes that you have to pay. It's the same thing as getting a check. It's just on the other end of it. It's a savings rather than a check. But yeah.
And do you help companies with tax credits as well, or just with grants?
We help identify them. Typically, the tax credits are pretty straightforward, so we don't do a lot with those. We are, however, working with, there's a federal tax credit program right now called the 48C tax credit. It's for energy efficiency projects. And we are helping a client right now with a full application for that tax credit because those are more convoluted. And there's a few tax credits that are a little bit more, the application process is a little bit more detailed. So grants on the other side, grants are offered at the state and federal level. Yeah.
Understand. All right. I think of a situation where often I'm talking to manufacturers and they tend to want to just talk about their stuff, the stuff they make, and they often miss speaking to prospects and customers about the business outcomes that are particularly meaningful to their customers. And I'm wondering if there's something similar in writing grants. Obviously, the grantors have certain KPIs that they expect you to hit that are incorporated into the grant. But I'm wondering if, as you prepare your application, you can say the same thing in two different ways that really speaks about what you want to talk about or speaks about what they want to hear. Is that fair?
Right. That is fair. And you brought up the term outcomes, and that's what I tell clients a lot of times. It's not really so much what you're doing, it's what outcome that funder will see as a result of you doing that. For example, you might have a leadership training program that's going to train 15 people. What the funder really cares about is that those people are going to be upskilled as a result of that training, that they're going to be able to have a stronger presence in your leadership team, that they will be better leaders, that they will be better able to lead people, and it will result in more production and more efficiency and that type of thing. But you're right. A lot of people, they go straight to, here's what we're going to do, and I'm like, okay, so what I like to do is just take them around to the outcomes and say, okay, when you do that, what's going to be the result? So I will have a client that will, a lot of times I find they get kind of mixed up in the whole equipment purchase thing. Like a lot of times they'll say, we're going to purchase this piece of equipment. Well, what are you going to purchase it for? We're going to purchase it to automate our production. Well, why do you want to automate your production? Because we want to have less people we want to be able to hire less people in order to, well, funder isn't going to really want to fund less people necessarily, but a lot of them see the potential in avoiding some amount of hiring because there is people have so much trouble hiring right now in the manufacturing sector. So it's kind of a dichotomy that I see in funding right now, that while they don't want to say we're going to fund you to hire less people, they understand the need for manufacturers to put in automation and to put in machine learning and those types of things to help automate their processes to make them more efficient and not have to rely so much on hiring people.
And I would think also if they then leverage that with local educational programs to invite schools in and students in to learn from what they had installed, there must be value in that as well.
Sure. And a lot of manufacturers do that. They will open up their floor to, I know of some manufacturers have actually conducted welding training at their facility for people in the community and have used that as a pipeline to hire welders because it's really hard to find welders. Apprenticeship programs. Manufacturers are increasingly understanding the importance of apprenticeship programs. And while those aren't a great fit for everybody, I think there's a lot of really sound training principles that come along with apprenticeships, things like related technical instruction, on-the-job training, mentoring. Apprenticeships are really powerful for companies when they have the ability to have that time to bring somebody on board.
So when you were at the steel company, you had the practical experience of working with grants when you're in the MEP. But you also obviously had the initiative and the vision, and you kind of took the lead on driving that grant that turned out to be very successful. In a typical company, who should own it? The CEO or the CFO or the department head who has a vision for the investment? Who owns it?
So what I find is there has to be, and I know this from my time in manufacturing too, there has to be buy-in at the top. There has to be a person at the top. And typically who we work with is either the HR director, the operations director, the CEO, the COO, a vice president of operations. Plant manager would be that would probably be I wouldn't call it the lowest level, but that would probably be the middle management equivalent that we sometimes tend to work with.
And this
I
is for
find
the
it best
executive sponsorship.
yes, for basically to have that support for the grant.
Right.
Who actually does the activities in the grant? It's typically the people that are supervisors and workers and engineers and that type of thing, and not discounting that at all. But you have to have that driving leadership from the top. And where I find that's really strong, we have a lot of success with companies because if the CEO or COO is driving it, people will not see it as just another initiative. They will see it as something important to the company.
Why would a CEO not be interested in sponsoring it?
I think what I find is that one, there's some, again, misconceptions about grants.
Okay.
A lot of times CEOs are pretty tied into a network of other CEOs, and maybe they heard of somebody that had to give some money back, or they heard about, Foxconn up in Wisconsin that, got a lot of publicity because they didn't hire the number of people that they were supposed to hire for a grant. And I try to explain and educate them. Some are just, I actually had a CEO tell me one time, it was a very large company, tell me that he didn't want to get a grant because he felt that was taking away money from other worthy organizations. And
interesting.
well, that's
so what's your answer to that?
Well, what I told him was, I appreciate that. That's a very community-minded way to look at it. However, your taxes go toward these funds that pay for these types of grants. And to me, it's more getting your tax money back. It's not taking it away from anybody else. The state has budgets. They have budgets to support those worthy organizations, and they have budgets to support these grants for other types of entities. The other thing that I'm finding really interesting, Ed, is now the federal government is again incentivizing states. There was a recent funding opportunity that came out that was for the automotive sector. So only, I think, 6 or 7 states could apply. It was the states with the most automotive presence. So Illinois, Kentucky, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, and I think there was 1 or 2 others.
South Carolina, maybe?
Yeah, South Carolina, and I think there was maybe Alabama or one of those. But anyway, those states could apply for funding. And as a result of that funding, which was funded through the IRA, it was funded through the Inflation Reduction Act, those states could create programs to incentivize automotive development. So I'm starting to see kind of that ERA funding, ARPA funding kind of thing come around again with IRA and BIL.
I see.
We have 2 more years to spend out that money. So I think we're going to continue to see a lot of manufacturing grants for direct to manufacturing, then through the states as well. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, you used a term, I assume it's a grant term of art, stacking grants, multiple grants simultaneously, I gather. When is that appropriate or acceptable, and when is it not?
Well, it's not when you get a federal grant. So you can't do what they call supplanting. So you can't take a federal grant that you get for half of a project cost and then use another federal grant to pay for that other half of the cost. That's called supplanting. Okay. And so that is not appropriate. However, if you are applying for state funds, and I used in my article as an example, you purchase equipment. Well, if you look at really that project that is involved with purchasing equipment, you have the equipment purchase and installation, you have the training of the people on the equipment, you have maybe software that you're purchasing to run the equipment. You have maybe you're going to need to market the equipment at, like maybe you're looking at doing a new product for overseas to send overseas. And maybe you're going to have a recycling component to it or something where you're going to be, doing manufacturing product with recycled material. All 5 of those things can be indicators of different grants. So you can get maybe a grant to purchase part of the equipment. You can get a grant for training to offset the training, both on the software and on the running the equipment, because that's upskilling. Right. You might be able to get a portion of the software paid for if the state has like a manufacturing readiness grant. A lot of those will fund like software purchases for machines. If you are going to be exporting, almost every state has what's called the STEP grant, which is State Trade Export Program. And those grants will fund up to $15,000 usually for travel to attend overseas trade shows. It will fund booth rental, booth construction, travel, interpretive services. If you need to translate your website to sell
Right.
to an overseas customer. It's a really great source of funding that, again, very few companies know about. So, it's funny because a lot of times we start with what's called a grant readiness and research project. And what we do is we ask some pointed questions about what their plans are, and then we go out and do research into funding at the state and federal levels. And clients are continually surprised at the number of programs that we come up with because they're like, we had no idea. And I'm like, no, you didn't, and that's why we're here,
Right.
Yeah. So that's just, that's what we found is, yeah.
So I know in many areas of business, there are companies that kind of stumble along with an ad hoc approach and have some occasional successes. Then there's companies that are, more consistent, but kind of as they remember. And then there's others that really build, engineer disciplined programs. And I assume it's the same in grants. Do you see companies that have ongoing disciplined programs to continuously explore and pursue grant opportunities?
I expected that with larger companies, and I've even found that very few larger companies have that. Really,
How
the
come?
minority of companies, I believe it's because, one, again, they don't even know that it's out there. We have had a lot of success at working with government relations people at larger companies. And the nice thing about working with them is they know that that funding is out there. They just don't have any ability to go get it. And so we will be the ones that come in.
Because it's not in their silo at work?
It's not in their silo. Yeah, it's just not, and everybody wants to do what they're good at, right?
Sure.
And a lot of people do not claim to be grant writers. A lot of people do not claim to be able to research grants. They're really, until we created our manufacturing grant database, there was no one place you could go to find manufacturing grants all over the country. And that's why we did it, was because we recognize that some companies may have the ability and the willingness to look at a grant and say, we're going to apply for this grant. What I more often find is that if they have gotten a grant in the past, they've kind of stumbled upon it. It wasn't anything that they were looking for,
Right.
maybe like a training grant or something. And then they got that and thought they were done. They didn't think there was anything else out there. And so, again, when we do that grant research project, we show them that there's all these things that are out there. And what we propose is exactly what you were talking about. Let's make a concentrated strategy and have a consistent effort to go out and apply again and again for these grants. Because the fact is, you can apply for a STEP grant every single year. You can apply for a training grant multiple times. I don't encourage that. I encourage clients to put as much of their training projects into a grant as possible, but you can apply for more than one in a year typically. So I think that it's much more often on the side of they've accidentally gotten it, they really liked it, but they thought that was it. And then they find out that there's actually more to happen. So we do ongoing work with a lot of clients because then we can help them with that. We can help them keep their focus on grants. We can help them apply, and we do ongoing research. Because the other fact is that most grant funding, the landscapes change a lot. For the past 2 years in particular, but I think always, you had the grants that would reoccur every fiscal year. You would have the grants that would maybe have 2 or 3 rounds during a fiscal year. You have federal grants that happen, that go about all the time, that they recur all the time. But you also have new grants. So you've got this, the BIL and the IRA and these significant sources of funding that have been given to like USDA and Department of Energy and they've created programs to expand electric vehicle production, battery recycling, battery production. Just continually, they've had these new opportunities. So what I tell clients is if you don't have a consistent approach to looking at grants and to applying for grants, you're going to miss out on funding because you're not going to catch that funding when it happens.
So for companies that do it once, kind of stumble into it, is there a significant administrative burden that they would be startled by that might discourage them from looking at others in the future?
There can be. It depends on what level of grant you go for. So the more complex the grant, the more reporting that's going to be required.
Okay.
That's, again, why we tell clients to go for smaller grants first, if at all possible, because you don't have the reporting.
Okay.
You typically just have to provide proof with most state grants that you spent the money, and then they will give you the funding. If a company is applying for a lot of federal grants, this would be the case with larger manufacturers. there could be a significant administrative burden. Now,
so you might need a dedicated person.
You might need a dedicated person or a very knowledgeable financial person, because typically the reporting is financial. There are ways to promote good reporting, like segregating accounts and making sure, that only grant money is paid out of a certain account and only grant funded activities have certain accounts associated with them. And again, a lot of larger manufacturers have the ability to do that more than small manufacturers. So there can be an administrative burden. We do help clients with the post-award if they ask. A lot of times, though, it's pretty simple reporting. It's not anything that requires new systems or anything like that.
And when you do a strategic project, how long a roadmap will you build with a company? Will you look out 5 years, or do you look out 18 months? What's normal?
Typically, manufacturers don't like to look out more than about 2 years. There are some, but not very many. I would love it if they would. It would be much nicer. But, I also find, and you may have found the same thing, Ed, that a lot of manufacturers don't have a strategic plan. They don't have, they do maybe some yearly planning for capital expenditures and that type of thing, but that's about it. So if we can get a year, 18 months, I think we're doing good. What I tell people, the longer runway we have for a grant, the better, because it does take time to go out and find the grants, and it takes time to vet the company for the grant, and it takes time to apply for the grant. So, and that all in addition to the review time once they submit the grant. So, it can be a year process, especially with larger grants, because, it takes 2 to 3 months to apply for the grant. And then sometimes you don't hear for 6 or 8 months.
Sure. What's the biggest grant related nightmare that you've ever experienced? God, I remember it like it was yesterday. So I helped a community college with an advanced technical education grant, which is an NSF grant that comes about every year. It's one of those recurring grants. Community colleges are typically the recipients for it. And I was working with a team of people, but the community college was the lead. And we had worked on this for 3 to 4 months. And it got close to the deadline. And again, this is one of the things I tell people is we do not submit grants on the deadline, because this can happen. But anyway, so she ghosted. My contact ghosted like 3 days before the grant deadline. I'm trying to call her. I'm trying to, I'm pleading with people that were on the team to go find out where she is. Nobody knew where she was. I called her secretary. Long story short, about 2 hours before the grant's due, she surfaces and says, okay, I'm ready to submit the grant. And I'm like, okay. And so she tells me she pushed a button. She pushed a button 2 minutes too late. Oh, man.
And the whole thing went to waste. And it was a great project. And I think it probably would have gotten funded. And she paid us. So she knew that she had done wrong. But it was just so disheartening to me. And, the other thing I hate, and to me is kind of a nightmare as well, is when I go to clients and they say, we just spent $5 million on major capital expenditures, and we trained all these people, and we just figured now was the time to look for grants. I'm like, no, the time to look for grants would have been about a year ago, because
so these are not typically retroactively applicable.
No, you can very much. That is very much the case. You cannot apply for something you've already done. So if a client, and I hate telling clients that, because they've spent a lot of money, and I'm like, well, if we would have looked at grants before that, then we probably could have found you at least something that could have helped offset the cost of all that. But let's look forward. Let's figure out what you're going to do next.
So I'm wondering, if you're just in general conversation with somebody, you see them on a trade show floor, or you bump into them at a networking event, and you're not talking about grants, and they're not thinking about grants. What kinds of symptoms would you hear in a conversation that your antenna would go up and you say, wait a minute, that sounds like we ought to be talking about grants? I assume that's the filter you see the world through, but even
it is.
with that caveat, there must be things that perk your antenna up.
Yeah. So when I'm talking to any manufacturer, I just love to hear about their business. That goes back to the engineer in me that really loves the processes and the growth, and there's just nothing more exciting than seeing that growth and development in manufacturing. And so I'll ask them, I'm like, hey, how's your business going? How are things going? And they'll, sometimes they'll say, well, things are a little slowed right now, but we really anticipate things are going to pick up. And I'm like, well, okay, how are you preparing for that? So I it's more of a typical conversation I would have had like in industrial sales, but
Right.
I now look at it through the lens of, by the way, did you know you could get grants for that? And so that I have that conversation quite a bit. And, again, my 90% of my job, at least the way I see it, is educating people on podcasts like this, at conferences. The more people I can, reach out to and tell about grants, the more are going to actually consider it part of their strategy to improve their business.
Sure. And certainly it's very overwhelming, and that's part of the value proposition that you bring. I know on your website, you try to distill it into 7 basic categories. I think 5 of which, there's some for rural companies, but 5 of which probably apply to most companies, regardless of where they are. Those are training, export, trade imbalance, which I think means import competition, market expansion, workforce development partnerships. Am I missing any that you think are broadly applicable?
Recycling and energy efficiency are, again, through USDA. The USDA has the REAP program, so it funds like renewable energy installations, and it funds energy efficiency projects. But even a lot of states, the state of Missouri, for example, has a wonderful program that actually funds equipment that's going to process recycled materials. And the whole goal of it, the outcome that they're looking for, is landfill avoidance. So they want to keep materials from going into landfills. And it's a $250,000 grant. It's not a small grant at all. It's also a little complicated. It's a little bit of an undertaking, but it's a great grant. It's a great program. And I do find that even at the local level, through the local solid waste districts, there's a lot of funding for things like balers for cardboard, compactors, like small equipment purchases that you need to have in order to do the recycling, in order to effectively recycle. So that would be another big one that I would say.
So it sounds to me, if I was going to break it down, there's 2 meta level categories. One is to create growth, and the other is to provide the tools to meet the increased demand created by that growth.
Right.
Interesting.
Yes.
When I searched grant opportunities for industrial manufacturing companies using Google, you showed up in position number 12, position number 21, and some further positions. It looks like you've really doubled down on articles and newsletters and other content in 2024. You just mentioned articles. Tell me about that decision from your business development perspective, and how you're executing and how you're measuring results.
Right. So I see articles a couple of different ways. One is I like to have that knowledge base to promote our services to companies, obviously. And we did a white paper early last year that was just a series of articles that I had done. And it did help develop some business. But really, as I said before, my real goal is to educate people. And so I will promote different articles that I have on LinkedIn just to try to put education out there to people. Whether or not they choose to work with us, that's fine. I have done a significant amount of SEO work. I have a great marketing team that's helped me with that. And that's why I show up so high on those searches, which I'm glad to hear. And
basically it's government programs and your company. It was pretty impressive.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and I think it's so much more of a topic now because people have seen that different companies have gotten grants. The whole grant thing has been a lot more visible in the media in the last couple of years. Department of Energy does a great job of promoting the funding they send out to companies, and I think they should. And they've had some great programs that have directly impacted manufacturing in a major way. So anytime I see that, again, I primarily work in LinkedIn. I really don't do any other social media, but I like the fact that in LinkedIn, I can go directly to my clients, my potential clients, and say, here's a new article that I wrote. And I write it on some, I wouldn't call them controversial topics, but just things I've been asked by clients before. Because clients will come to me and they're like, we heard that such and such manufacturer got $5 million to do this. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. We're going to start with a $25,000 grant. We're not going to start with a $5 million grant, and by the way, that client was a multi-million-dollar company, multi-billion-dollar company that had 10, divisions and, probably had the wherewithal to figure all that out. So yeah.
So it's interesting to hear your success with content and with SEO because often when I talk to manufacturers about that kind of an approach, they say, well, yeah, that's great if you're selling software, but our industry is different. Our buyers don't use Google to search and find things. Instead they just call their peers. Obviously, I mean, I think we all instinctively understand that's wrong. Everyone uses the internet, but you're selling to those same kinds of companies and you're having success.
Yeah.
That's great.
And, when I worked for companies, nothing bothered me more than when I would look on our own website and I would see outdated blog posts and I would see, I'm like, let me write something. Just let me put something out there, and I that's the role I would take. I was an engineer, but I was writing the articles for the company blog,
Wow.
and it's, what I tell people is it's always the best way to sell, at least in my experience, is to show you have the expertise.
Yeah, build trust.
To show you have build trust and show you have the expertise to help somebody when they need help.
Right.
And so I think it's really important to continually put out there what your expertise is. I write 2 to 3 articles a month. And again, it's just great resources that I can do LinkedIn posts on, or I can share with clients that I'm speaking at a conference with, because I write articles to the questions my clients ask me.
Right.
So yeah.
So let's talk more specifically about Lakeview Consulting, your company. You've got a lot of free material on your site. You mentioned the downloadable guide to grants for manufacturers.
Yep.
You've got a free database, a paid database. You offer consulting on specific grants. You have, I think, a retainer program. Introduce us to the company. Make your pitch for Lakeview.
Sure. So Lakeview Consulting is a company that helps fund the success of American manufacturing. Our purpose is to increase prosperity in U.S. manufacturing for current and future generations. I have grandkids. I would love for them to, know that that's a viable option for them. What we do is we help companies wherever they are find and access grants. So I made the manufacturing database for smaller companies, ones that maybe don't have a lot of resources to hire us or to, engage our services right away, or companies that just want to see what's out there. They just want to see the programs that are out there. It's updated monthly. We have a free version and we have a premium version. If, however, a company comes to us and says, we really want to know what grants are out there for us, for our specific situation, then we do what we call the Grant Research and Readiness Project. That is typically our opening project with any client, even trade association, foundations, any of them. We typically start with that grant research to show them what's out there, to show them what the potential is. And then we can move from there either into standalone grant writing. So if a client sees that they are eligible for a REAP grant, they want to apply for a REAP grant, we can quote the cost to do that. We work on a flat fee basis. And then we can also do an ongoing, like I said before, the ongoing contract, which is 6 or 12 months. It includes monthly calls with the client. It includes monthly refreshes to the research. Anything that's new will come out in that research. And it includes all the application writing under that. So instead of doing project by project, we can actually just do a monthly fee, which our clients like because it's easy to budget for. So we work pretty much with wherever our clients are. If they really just want to see what's out there and they don't want to spend any money to do it, we have the ability for them to do that. If they want to engage with us and really want to put a serious effort into that, we're happy to do that as well.
Is it realistic that companies could manage this on a DIY basis?
Yes. I mean, if they have the people on their staff, it's entirely possible. I mean, I did it for our company and I wasn't a journalism major. So, I mean,
but you came from the MEP background. I mean,
I did come from the MEP background and I knew what it was to do that. So I think it's harder for companies than they would think. And my fear is that would keep them from doing it at all. So I guess, again, that's why I offer the free resources, because at least if they see that something's out there, it might spur them on to get some help. But, I also understand that it's, there are people within companies that can write and that can do these things and that have the time to do them. So I think everybody's kind of at a different place with grants. I don't know that everybody's ready to go and just go full bore into a grant research, and I have to recognize that that's the case.
The problem is, like with everything, there's science and art. And if a few companies decide to try to do it on a DIY basis and they think they're checking the boxes, but they're missing the nuance and they get denied and they do 3 of them, they think we're just wasting money, then they walk away and give up on it.
Yeah. And that is my fear. It is much more. And what I tell clients is that 90% of grant writing is project management. It is herding the cats, getting all the information. 10% of it's writing, but the writing is important. Again, you have to, we find this particularly when we work with high technology companies. They start talking about their technology and their innovation and their, using, acronyms and all the industry speak and all that kind of stuff. And, if I was a reviewer and I saw all that, I'd be like, okay, yeah, I don't get any of this. So a lot of times we have to take what a client gives us, even for training grants or anything, you kind of have to massage it to that outcome. You have to get it to the outcome. You have to say, we're going to upskill these people, not we're going to train these people. We have to say, we're going to give them leadership skills, not we're going to train them on leadership, So a lot of times it's a very subtle nuance, but it does take that nuanced approach a lot of times to get it right.
And you mentioned that first project you often do. Is there a standard resource requirement, length of time it takes, amount of investment, or does it depend case to case?
We have 3 tiers of that. And basically the tiers reflect the increased complexity. So a lot of times, especially with smaller companies, we'll just do one location. We'll just look at grants and maybe tax credits. And that's the lowest level. And then our 3rd tier is actually national research or more than 10 sites, more than 10 states, because every state has its own set of grants. So it's a much more complex report. It takes about 3 to 5 weeks for us to do that project. We have the client fill out a questionnaire. So it's online. It's an electronic questionnaire. Once they fill that out, we schedule a kickoff call. And then from there, it's about 3 to 5 weeks for us to get the report back to them.
And so the total time that an executive would have to invest upfront would be to do the questionnaire, maybe to answer some questions, to get you some information, and then to review a report with you.
Yep. That's it. Yep. Okay. It's maybe 2.5 hours, and we don't ask for information that isn't readily available, The other thing we're starting to do is kind of that grant readiness side of things, because we're finding that a lot of clients, even when they're applying for state grants, a lot of state grants do mirror federal grants in a lot of ways. So a lot of state grants, for example, want to see a work plan. They want to see a project work plan. So we're starting to develop some templates for clients to get that information out there and get them more grant ready so that they have their projects and their work plans developed.
Right.
We do work through that with the client, but it makes it a lot simpler if they at least have to put some thought into it before that. So
obviously your site's a great resource with a lot of resources people can access. What others can you recommend for folks to go to learn more about grant programs? Maybe the MEP sites. Are there any good podcasts or YouTube channels or books or things that you recommend?
So, my book is a pretty simple and it scared the living daylights out of me when you said it was 10 years ago, because it was a decade ago now. My goodness. I was like, man, I've been doing this a while. Yeah. So basically, our website, I do want it to be a resource for people. In addition, I do post a lot on LinkedIn. I post a lot of my upcoming conference. I would encourage your customers or your podcast listeners to attend your trade association conferences. I'm speaking at many of them. And so I put those, I'm developing a speaking page for my website, but basically I'm speaking at the Association of Sealing, American Sealing Council conference, decarbonization summit in a couple weeks, and then October comes, and then there's all kinds of fun activities. So I'm speaking at FabTech this year. So I like to get out among people and talk. Right. I always leave time afterwards for clients to talk to me in one-on-one. So those are probably the best ways. My book is called The For-Profit Grant Writing Guide. It's on Amazon. I think it's like $9.95 or something. It's a pretty cheap book. So so I think those are good. There aren't hardly any consultancies like ours in the United States, unfortunately. So we are kind of the one and only that puts this information out there. I do know of we do have a partner that does new market tax credit consulting that can really be a big impact to a lot of manufacturers. They provide some good information as well. So, yeah.
Let's look at this from a slightly different angle. I work with a lot of companies that make machines. and those
Mhm.
machines can help increase production and output and automate and improve quality and all that kind of thing. And
Sure.
often those companies will have lease and finance information available for their buyers. Do you have any OEMs that hire you as a resource to help their buyers work through the grant process in order
Yeah.
to buy their machines?
Yeah. So basically, we've worked with OEMs. We are working with one right now that's a solar company. So they're in solar installers. So they provide referrals to their clients for our services for like REAP funding to help
Right.
offset the cost of those. We have a longstanding contract with a major industrial distributor, Motion Industries, and any client of Motion Industries has access to our services through my contract with them. So basically, if they want to apply, they have a strong training program there. So they train, and as many OEMs do, they train on the equipment that they're selling. So they do a lot of maintenance training and safety training. So they actually have a grants page on their website, and we've helped a number of their clients get training grants to fund their maintenance training. So yeah, we do a lot of that work with OEMs. Typically what we can do is we can generate a research report that they can put on their website. We can update that report, and then they can refer their clients to us. That's typically how it works. And we do work with a welding machinery distributor as well.
So some OEMs, but also it sounds like some sales channel.
Yep. Distributors, OEMs, training. We just did a research report for a welding training institute out in Colorado. So basically any of those types of, if they do any training, if they provide any machinery, then we can help their clients as well.
And do you have any exciting case studies that you're at liberty to cite where the OEM providing that or the manufacturing providing it to the sales channel has helped them grow revenue?
I don't typically know if it increases their revenue, but I have had clients tell me that, or I've had these OEMs tell me and these distributors tell me that, the fact that they were able to provide those services did help get a client to buy from them.
Oh, that's neat.
I would say yes, that would be the case.
So as we record this today, it's September 17th, and Manufacturing Day is just over 2 weeks away. Do you have any plans for observing Manufacturing Day?
I'm probably going to be at some conference because there's a lot of conferences in manufacturing in October.
Right.
What I like to tell people is that Manufacturing Day shouldn't be just a day. It really should be an ongoing awareness campaign. I mean, I was in manufacturing when Manufacturing Day started. I was in manufacturing when I helped one of my companies set up tours for local school kids. What I'm heartened by is that there's a growing number of career and tech ed schools now that are forming within school districts and as an alternative for kids who want that hands-on education. So what I'm going to be spending Manufacturing Day and Manufacturing Month doing is just highlighting some of those programs, really promoting technical education as an alternative and a viable alternative for a lot of kids. Even where you don't have a career and tech ed program, you'd be amazed at the number of dual credit programs that are out there at schools now. There's a lot of industrial training that happens through local community colleges that high schoolers can get credit for. And I think that all that is to say that the education system is changing, albeit slowly, to really, really focus on the needs of the manufacturers in their community and their needs to find skilled workers, whether they're participating in apprenticeship programs or whatever they're doing. There's a lot of great programs out there. And one of our clients is the Fabricating and Manufacturers Associations. It's called the Nuts, Bolts, and Thingamajigs program. It's their summer camp program. And we've worked with them for, I think it's going on 3 years now. And we've helped them get millions of dollars in grants to support their camps. And I can tell you that these are wonderful camps. They're like fourth grade and up. They do summer camps. They do targeted camps. They do girls camps. They even have a disabilities camp that they offer for people that are in like sheltered workshops and that type of thing to help educate them to have manufacturing careers. They work with manufacturers in the city to do, to come in and talk and to do tours. And for any of the camp participants, it's a wonderful program and it's grown incredibly. over the past few years. And I can say now, I think they're in the hundreds of camps a year now.
Wow.
And when we started, they were less than 100. So I think they had 400 or 500 camps last year. So it's a wonderful program, and it's really great to work with them. So, I think there's so much to celebrate right now, but there's so much more to do. There really is. So
you kind of started that segment talking about vocational education, and I was wondering, since you're a walking billboard for women in STEM, which so many seem to think is a lost cause, but you're a perfect example of how successful that can be. I was wondering if you had specific examples of supporting that. It sounds like through some of the camp stuff that you are. Yeah, some of the camps, they call them the glow camps. They're for girls that are interested in doing manufacturing. There's also one of our other clients is the Chemical Coaters Association Education Foundation, and they also do similar camps for. They have girls camps, and they have chemical, grant or camps to help students get it more into the chemical painting and chemical coating type of thing. So, there's some wonderful programs. I think that when I started in manufacturing well over 25 years ago, I was always the only woman in the room. I'm still sometimes the only woman in the room, but there's at least a few more now than there were. Right. So I think it's, again, we've come a long way. There's some really wonderful groups like Women in Manufacturing that do phenomenal networking and give so much support to people, especially women, because they do need, especially when they're younger, they need help. Right. They need mentoring, they need help, they need competence, to really take a seat at the table, and it's hard to do when you're a 20-some-year-old woman and you're sitting in a room of very seasoned men that have no trouble telling you that they know what they're doing. Right. And, it's, and I had some great mentors, and I was very, very lucky. I had some great support from the highest levels at the manufacturing companies that I worked with. And that's what I would hope for any woman going into manufacturing. But I would also say it's been a very rewarding career. It's been a wonderful experience. It is, it's one of the most personally satisfying careers, just because you see each and every day the impact that you get to do. And I don't think I would have left for an outside manufacturing job. I always had to be connected to that somehow. And to me, even if we get a client $30,000 or $40,000 for a training program, that's $30,000 or $40,000 they didn't have before they signed with us. Right. So, it means something, and it means that they're going to continue to grow, and they're going to continue to invest, and that's all good. So, and investing in manufacturing, I think, ties in with a philosophy I heard you articulate very clearly on the Manufacturing Masters podcast. Your commitment to American manufacturing. You alluded to, or you didn't allude, you spoke directly about your grandchildren and your hope for them to thrive in an environment of manufacturing. Talk a little bit more about where that philosophical commitment comes from. Well, the way I feel about it is neither one of my boys are in manufacturing. So, and now they chose different careers, and that's all good. But I think that I don't want my grandkids to grow up in a society where we are all service, where we're all doing a service. I don't think that's a productive contributor to the world economy. I think manufacturing makes us a productive contributor to the world economy. And if I have two grandsons, and I know from my boys that a lot of boys in particular are very tactile. They like to work with their hands. They get very bored if they're sitting in a classroom looking at a book. They don't like that. I would like for my kids, if they're that way, I would like for them to have an option to work with their hands, to do what they need to do. And just to have, I think choices are the best things you can have, so my philosophy has always been in raising my kids now and watching my grandkids go, give yourself a lot of options, because the more options you have, the more choices you have in your life, and you're not pigeonholed into any one thing. So at the same time, I was doing some research and saw that Bartelso, the St. Louis suburb where you're based, grew from 595 to 635 people from the 2010-2020 census. And that's a kind of small town America. We contributed to that. I mean, a machine shop can have a material impact on that kind of a community. It can raise the entire community.
And a lot of people in our community, it is a very small community. But it's very interesting because we've had significant growth just within these last 2 to 3 years. People, I think right now, especially since COVID and with more of them working from home, are settling in these communities that are quiet,
right,
and safe, and have wonderful schools, have a strong church foundation. Um, and I can tell you that most of the people, especially people my age and maybe a little bit older, a lot of them worked at GM. A lot of them worked in St. Louis at Chrysler when they were in St. Louis. There's a pretty significant machine shop about 10 minutes from us. We have a school bus not manufacturer, but he does some work on school buses. A lot of people are employed by their company. There's a large aero sheds. There's a number of smaller. They're smaller. The Air Force Base
right,
employs a lot of our people. It's only about 25 minutes away. So, and now there's an airport. So, I mean, honestly, I think this, and we've seen the growth in these communities out here. And I think it's mainly because, again, people are kind of craving that quiet, that peace, that community, because we have an incredibly strong community.
So that's tradition on one hand. I'm sure some people listening to this, on the other hand, are thinking, grants. All right, well, let me do a ChatGPT search to find grant opportunities, and I'm going to have Claude write a couple of grant proposals for me. Is that going to work?
There are parts of a grant application that Claude can write. We've used Claude. We've used ChatGPT on a number of occasions to do more to do marketing and more to do to explain certain things, because it does a really great job of explaining concepts that sometimes we have a hard time explaining.
Right.
Like, what is innovation? Like, we had clients for a while, a lot of them in the technology sector, especially, like, we have the most innovative product. And so I actually asked Claude one day, I'm like, so can you explain innovation to a 5-year-old? And that's what I felt like I really should be doing. It's like, no, what you're doing is not innovative. It's just a slight change on what you were doing before. That's not innovation. So yes, you can. I've used it that way. I haven't used it to write a grant application. So we can use it to develop templates. I just don't know that and there's a lot of talk in the grant profession right now about ChatGPT and the ethics of using it. I think it's great for needs research. I think it's great for market research. I think there's some really great tools in both programs that enable market research. I think it's easier than ever to get information on something. I use it quite often just for different things, like how should I write this email? And even my HubSpot email even has an AI generator, so now and LinkedIn has an AI generator. So you can actually make your posts sound better through AI, and I love that. I think all this is, and I'm excited to see what it brings to manufacturing, because I think there's such a great, we have a client that actually is working with an AI provider to develop an AI-enabled program to train their customer service people, which I think is phenomenal, because, customer service, it isn't all one kind of question or one kind of thing. So basically, this AI tool is going to collect data from their customer service people, and then when new customer service people come in, they'll be able to train them using the AI tool. So very innovative, very different.
And legitimately innovative, not just using the term.
Legitimately innovative, yes, legitimately innovative.
So you're going to be speaking at FabTech in Orlando on the 15th.
I am, yeah.
Listeners that are going to be there can meet up with you there. You've got other public appearances coming up, but you don't have those listed on your site yet. Where can people learn? On LinkedIn?
I do. Actually, yes, I put out that. I put out my conference information on LinkedIn. My speaking page should be up this week or early next.
Okay.
And I'll promote that over LinkedIn. I'm speaking at the CLEG conference next week, Wednesday. I'm speaking at the Spring World Conference in early October in Chicago. And then I'm speaking at FabTech. And then I'm speaking at the Industrial Heating Equipment Association's Decarbonization Summit in Indianapolis. And then I'm speaking for the programming committee of the Metal Powder Industries Foundation. And then in the spring, I'm doing a presentation in New Orleans for something metal powder or metallurgy.
So by the time Thanksgiving rolls
quite a few.
around, you're going to be ready for a 4-day weekend.
I'm going to be ready for a trip to Jamaica, yes.
All right. So for people who aren't going to be at any of those events, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Sure. You can connect through my website, lakeviewconsulting.net. There's a contact button on there. And then also through LinkedIn. I post probably at least 3 to 4 times a week on LinkedIn. And you can always reach out to me and connect with me and then be connected to what we do. I also have a newsletter. You can subscribe for that through my website. So you can get regular emails about manufacturing grants. I usually base each newsletter around an article that I've written. So I do share my articles in that way as well. So those are probably the best ways to get a hold of me.
Good. Wrap us up. 3 minutes of sage advice on the grant opportunity for industrial manufacturers and why they need to and how they should go about pursuing it.
My sage advice would be, don't just assume that there aren't grants out there. There very likely are. If you have the ability to go out and look for those grants, that's great. If you don't, feel free to contact us. We can either put you in touch with our manufacturing grant database, or we can put you in touch with our research services. We're here to help manufacturers grow and prosper. We fund their success. And my advice is, get your questions answered, get knowledgeable about grants, and then decide if it's the right thing for you and your company. And if it is, we're more than happy to help.
And stop leaving money on the table.
Stop leaving money on the table. I hate that.
Right.
I always go back to my time in manufacturing. And it's like, I always hated it, especially in like industrial sales. When we get done with a sale, and we're like, we probably left money on the table. There's probably something we could have like increased our price on or something. And manufacturers are leaving money on the table every day. I know that. So my goal is to have them not do that. So, yeah.
Perfect. This has been fabulous, Micki. Thanks for spending time. I know you've got all that travel coming up. You've got a lot of clients. You got other things to be doing. And I'm grateful that you were willing to spend time with me and with our audience today.
I had a great time. Thanks so much, Ed. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. For everyone listening, you need to share this with your colleagues who might otherwise be leaving money on the table at your company. It's a shame to do that. So find those grants, reach out to Micki and her team to help you make it an efficient process, build a disciplined process around pursuing those grants, make it part of your business plan. And thank you for joining and listening to the Industrial Growth Institute podcast today. Be sure to share, like, comment, and subscribe.